Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Monday, June 24th. Derek Van Riper, Sarah's here with you. Another busy weekend in baseball. Lots of injuries. We got Max Scherzer coming back from a long stint on the IL. Pitched pretty well his first time out. We'll dig into all of those news items. We'll look at some of the sources of where the money went over the weekend, as we do each and every Monday. Some of the more interesting pickups from weekly fantasy leagues. And we'll take a look at some players that were dropped going the other way in 12-team leagues. Plus, we got a new tool that actually is not that new. We just didn't see it before today. Fangraphs now has a player rater, so we'll talk a little bit about some ways that we're going to be using that going forward as well. How's it going for you on this Monday?
Doing great. I am older now.
Yeah. How about that?
Yeah. That's like definitely past the point at which you're like, yay, birthday, and a little bit more like, that's a number.
What do you got now? You got a good baseball number at least?
Yeah. I wonder who has my
44?
My jersey number 45. Yikes.
45. Prince Fielder, I think, might have been a 45. No, Prince was 28.
Baseball Reference has a whole, of course they do. It's amazing. The best wore with my numbers, Bob Gibson.
There you go.
Although he wore a lot of numbers, maybe? No. Those are his years. Pedro Martinez, dude, 45. That's what I was thinking. I knew there was a 45 in there. I remembered. Okay, I feel better. It's Pedro year.
Papa Fielder, Cecil wore 45. Prince wore 28. You'd think I would know that. I watched more Prince than Cecil, but I did watch both. That's how old I am, I guess, if I want to quantify it that way. But yeah, 45, great baseball number. So I think you've done well. This is a good year for you.
And Garrett Cole, is he still wearing it?
Yeah,
he's still wearing 45. That's cool.
Yep.
I wonder if he wears it because of Pedro. That would be surprising to me, but kind of cool. It's that's one of those things that I don't care about.
You don't think a lot about jersey numbers?
I don't care about. I don't know. It's like I don't know. And there's like a whole bunch of trivia based on it and stuff. And I'm like, I have no idea what number jersey. Like I only remember like Michael Jordan 23. That's like pretty much it. That's all I remember. I guess I remember Judge 99 because it's just like 99.
Sure.
But like when the kids were choosing their uniform numbers recently, or when they are choosing their uniform numbers, they'll like be like, did somebody wear this? And I'm like, probably. You want me to get that Baseball Reference page open real quick and see?
Look this one up, kids.
So the younger one, who's really into swag, has like chosen a lot of like 00 and like he's always choosing it for how it looks, And then Felix, the older one, has been more like, "Ooh, did Buster Posey had 8? I'll do 8." It's like, so I've had to learn a little bit about it, but I've also told them, guys, I can get my phone open if you want me to.
No, that's a good way to go. It's a big deal. Coaching in high school, that was a big day. It was always done by seniority on the roster. So when I had the varsity kids, the oldest varsity kids, the kids that had been in the varsity longer. So if I had a 3-year junior, they could pick before a first-year senior on varsity. That was their number last year. They shouldn't.
You know about the monkey sphere, right?
Monkey sphere.
There's this idea that in monkey cultures, the new monkey that has just joined the group is at the lowest rung of seniority, no matter what his age is or what his size is.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's the monkey sphere. So
you
ran things by the monkey sphere.
Well, thinking a little bit more about myself, yeah, that tracks.
I like how things. I like how when the new player joins the team and they're like, "Oh, what number are you going to take?" And then there is, I think, a very similar kind of stature question of like, "Well, Juan Soto's coming to the team, so sorry, reliever X, like you're just gonna have to give it to him." But then Juan comes in and doesn't want to be a dick, so he'll be like, well, hey, I'll give you this watch,
Right.
I'm getting paid $30 million this year. I'm gonna give you this little watch. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then somebody writes a feel good story where like, and Juan Soto gave him a watch for his, for his number.
Wish I could be 22 again. Be nice.
Yeah.
Be good to push reset.
$30 million a year.
Yeah. Let's get to some topics. We got a suspension incoming for Edwin Díaz because he was ejected for a sticky stuff inspection failure on Sunday night. A rough year continues to get worse for Edwin Díaz. It's not quite the party hangout, bounce back campaign that I had expected for Diaz coming into the year. ERA still just below 5. The strikeout rate, while it's not at the astronomically high rates that we've seen at its peaks, is still not terrible, just a shade below 35%. But the ups and downs continue, and this is another down with a 10-game suspension looming.
Yeah, I mean the pictures looked fairly obviously like he had stuff on his hand, and there's like I don't like doing this because it's like punitive and like, you know, like I'm not trying to cast aspersions on his game, but there's like a very obvious dip in spin rate on his fastball that happened during enforcement. And then there's a very obvious climb back to his old spin rate. I'm just telling the story of the picture of the graphs that I'm looking at, you know? And then there's the images they had off the hand. So I don't know what to say in moments like this. It's like, I hope that he can come back and command the ball. For him, command of especially the slider, I think, is just as important as any spin rate benefits because he does not have good natural command. So it would suck to lose him for 10 days and then have him come back and not have that same grip and sort of go back to the struggle bunny that he kind of was at the beginning of the year. Maybe a kind of a lost year for Edwin Díaz. It's kind of hanging the precipice a little bit. But if he can come back and find other ways to grip the ball that are legal and refine his command, he did seem like he'd been doing better since he came back.
Right back to the familiar faces, Adam Ottavino, maybe Reed Garrett, the closer by committee approach, perhaps until Diaz returns from a suspension that I don't think is official yet, but is likely to be official by the time most people get to hear this pod. It's basically automatic unless the appeal is successful, and I don't get the sense this particular appeal is going to be successful based on.
I mean, it's such a subjective moment that I think there's just nothing to say, because you can say I didn't have anything on it, and then they say, well, the umpires have full ability to enforce this stuff. So
yeah, the report says you did.
Right. So like what do we do now, you know? But I don't think it was Drew Smith, because, you know, Drew Smith was kind of, the deal was that he was the pitcher that was left over, you know. He was not used in the 8th. So he does have some interesting pitches, but and decent stuff plus, but the velo is not there. He's not a velo guy, and I just feel like velo actually matters outside of stuff. You know, when it comes to, I mean, 94.7, I guess is velo, but like for a reliever, that's barely above average. So yeah, I think it'll be one guy that I like is Dediel Nunez, but I don't think the usage suggests that he's about to step in. So I guess it's Reed Garrett.
I think when you look at this bullpen, though, and consider different possibilities for the second half of the season, you know, more likely than not, Diaz is still the guy. He's got a big contract. They probably can't move that contract without eating a lot of money. We've talked about it before. Maybe they would be willing to do that, depending on the prospect they could get back. It's probably a bullpen we're not thinking about that often unless Diaz actually gets hurt again at some point. But I do think keeping an eye on those next options up will become more interesting after the trade deadline, because if the Mets were to slide away from contention in the next 5 weeks or so, a few of those veteran relievers would be gone, and then someone like Nunez could emerge in the event of a Diaz absence, right? Like, that's where the surprise could be. The twist could be later this season.
Are we? Yeah, are we selling? But I will mention Nunez's leverage index when he's put into the game. This is on Fangraphs, is GMLI. And that just says how important his plate appearances were to the outcome of the game, or how much leverage there was. Over the last 2 weeks has been third to Edwin Díaz and Sean Reed-Foley. And though Sean Reed-Foley does appear there, when you go over to holds, Nunez has 2 holds to Reed-Foley's 1. So Nunez has been in the mix for setup. Just throwing that out there.
a name to file away, depending on how things break for the Mets here in the next few weeks.
A little bit more like maybe he'll establish himself as the setup guy and then take it after. We had suggested something like Edwin Díaz to the Reds, which I think something like this almost makes it more likely maybe that the Mets would want to like eat some of that and get rid of him. Just doesn't it? That's how I might read it. So would it make it more likely the Reds want to acquire him? I think the Reds would want to acquire him if there was like, oh, we're not have to give up a big prospect and we're paying $30 million or $40 million for the next 3 years of Edwin Díaz. Like, it's more of a question, can we afford it or not? Because it will help our bullpen.
I'd love it. A lot of good stories could be written off of it. So,
you're right. The Diaz brothers.
The Diaz brothers being in the same bullpen. That'd be fun.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get to Max Scherzer's return. He pitched 5 scoreless innings, struck out 4, didn't walk anybody, and got a win, even though he threw 57 pitches. So, very efficient return. I was looking at the pitch mix. 3 most used pitches, the 4-seamer, the slider, and the curve. That chewed up about 85% of what he threw. A 4-seamer was used about half the time, down a little bit from what we saw a year ago. 92.9 was the average on Sunday in the return. Scherzer averaged 93.7 on that pitch last year. Slider, I think, was a little closer to its previous norm. Curveball down about 0.7 miles per hour, but not an alarming drop in velo, but overall, seemingly a pretty successful return for Scherzer, especially given how few pitches he had to throw to get to those 5 frames.
Yeah. I'm a little worried. I mean, you get a lot of signal in that first velo reading. Stuff was pretty far down. He's never been a stuff king. He's had turned in some good seasons with lower stuff numbers just based on having a big mix and having good command. But I mean, the worst stuff plus that we have on record for Max Scherzer is 98, and that game was 82. That's worst seasonal stuff plus that we have. So he's pretty far from where he was, and 92.9 is not especially good. So it's just, if you're looking at him versus someone like Garrett Cole as like, okay, they prove they're healthy, is this the time to buy? Garrett Cole had a slightly larger drop in velo. But if you look at his stuff plus, it's still pretty good. It's not as standout as it was. Either one of them could get injured again. I mean, you'd rather buy Cole than Scherzer, considering the price. Not even close. Even considering the price, though.
Right. I think we're at the point with Scherzer and Verlander, given their ages, given the injuries they've dealt with recently, where they live outside of the top 40 among starting pitchers, at least as they are right now, right? With diminished stuff relative to what we've been accustomed to in the later part of their career. Could they rebound back into that range? Yeah, it's possible, but it's harder to bet on that given how old they are.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean they're without value. It just means I don't think you can set and forget them. You can't just throw them in your lineup and never think twice about matchups anymore. I think that's more where we're at with those guys. But if you said the would you rather is Justin Steele versus Max Scherzer, like is that a fair question, or is that a runaway for Steele?
I think I'd still pretty likely take Steele, but I think you're zeroing in on it a little bit. Let me see where I had Steele in my last working ranks. I had Steele 40. Somebody else, Blake Snell's around there. Seth Lugo or Max Scherzer? Max Scherzer, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the right cluster. Very rosterable, very usable, but just not an automatic.
40s, yeah.
Not bad. You'll take
I had
it.
Verlander at 52nd. I think that was maybe right around the time he got hurt again.
Yeah, I think you previously had him at about 36 based on the published list, so same tier.
Yeah.
Excited to have him back, even though it's not, late career stud version of Max Scherzer. That's the summary for me. Dane Dunning gets bumped from the rotation, by the way. He's among the most dropped players as a result of Scherzer's return. Here's one from Miami. Jesus Luzardo likely out 4 to 6 weeks, and this is due to a lumbar stress reaction. the Marlins have been just crushed by pitching injuries in the last year or so now. Like this group of guys on the IL includes Sandy Alcantara, Yuri Perez, Luzardo, Edward Cabrera, Braxton Garrett's on the 15-day IL again. Ryan Weathers is on the 15-day IL again. Sixto Sanchez, who they were just using kind of to fill in for all these injuries, is also hurt. I don't think he's in the same tier in terms of how much they expect from him in the long run, but it's hard to build around pitching because this happens, but it seems like the Marlins pitching has had a ridiculously unlucky combination of injuries that have overlapped that's really dragged them down here in 2024 and kind of going back to the middle of last season.
Yeah. What do they teach as an organization? Is there some link there? The one thing that they do teach, I think, is the power change. I know you have, and I don't really necessarily agree with him, but I know you have Keith Meister bringing up the power change as a reason pitchers are getting hurt more now. I would say that we might not know exactly what the power changes ramifications are on the elbow as directly measured or as like a grouping, like, oh, here's how healthy the power change guys were, because it's a kind of a relatively new phenomenon. I mean, the charting of the power change is a little bit starts with Felix Hernandez, and Zach Greinke. So I don't know that we know what the long-term health implications of the power change are, but everybody in the Marlins that threw that power change is gone, is hurt. But they also did some acquiring of players with some tricky track records, like the Rays. So, like Jesus Luzardo has had injury concerns his whole career, right?
Right. Yeah, he was definitely someone that had above average risk throughout his time in Oakland. Like that was just built into the profile. He's had arm injuries in the past. This is just something different, being a back problem. But Rogers
has been hurt a lot over his career, and I think Weathers being hurt, I would describe it a little bit more as he just started throwing as hard as he could to try and stay in the big leagues. I mean,
he
became a reliever, and like we mentioned that now he's throwing really hard and throw close to his max, and Luzardo was a little bit like that too. So it's like, that's a little bit more. There's more research behind that. Glenn Pleisic has shown that the closer you throw to your personal max, the more stress you're putting on the elbow. So that tells a little bit of the story of Weathers and Luzardo. But yeah, I don't know that there's a lot of opportunity now. The second grouping, the guys that are going to move into these roles, I'm not that interested in any of them except for I am interested in Max Meyer. I think Max Meyer getting a chance is good, but Yanni Chirinos, Sean Anderson, if they give Sixto a chance, I'm Rodri Munoz, mostly like 2-week streamers that they're both at home at best. Like I'm not that interested in most of them. Meyer, I would put a little bit of bid on and put a little bit of interest behind. Once they announce it, it's just they seem like they're dragging their feet on that announcement for some reason.
Well, you mentioned before Max Meyer's pitch mix has been different during his time in AAA. When he comes back up to the big leagues, it's probably more just let's just get guys out. We don't care about developing the pitches as much.
Working on the changeup while he's down there, and I doubt he's going to work that hard on the changeup in the big leagues.
Like you still care, but your priorities shift with the move back up once he comes up. And that Braxton Garrett injury, I mean, that's a left forearm flexor strain. That's not necessarily a quick return either. And Garrett,
that's the precursor to Tommy John, by the way.
The kicker with Garrett too is like he's more of the crafty, not a max velo, not a high end velo guy. Maybe it's close to his max, even though it's a low max. But you would think that Braxton Garrett and his approach would be more sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me a little bit of that Drew Haugen piece on Down on the Farm, suggesting that spin matters. Although I don't know that he's necessarily high spin, but he does have a good breaking ball, that 83 mile an hour breaking ball he have. But yeah, I mean, you wouldn't think the guy sitting 90.7 is the one going down right now.
I just bring it up because I know people are thinking about future strategies and saying maybe I'll be more careful about the amount of velocity.
Yeah, Garrett is somebody you'd buy. You'd be like, oh yeah, he's the load him. He's the gonna be healthy all year guy. He's the command guy.
Load him, pitcher friendly ballpark, home streamer, and usually even get away with road starts. But yeah,
literally what I did with Seth Lugo.
Right.
It's like, yeah, most of the time I'll play him. Yeah.
The state of the depth chart with all these injuries: Trevor Rogers, Rodri Munoz, Chirinos, Kyle Tyler.
You didn't even want to say these words.
These are just, I mean, Kyle Tyler. Some of these guys are just like last chance saloon types. Kyle Tyler was at AA last year and was a starter all year, but had a 5.63 ERA and a 160 WHIP as a starter. Strikeout per inning stuff, but it wasn't working. He was 26. So I mean, there's not a lot to get excited about. The next wave.
It's wild though, because Stuff Plus doesn't mind him.
Yeah, maybe there's a bit of a deep sleeper there.
But it's 4 innings. But still, it says he has a really good curveball and a pretty good cutter. Does he actually throw the cutter? Let me see here. He throws the cutter. Yeah, 50% of the time. Interesting. So he's a cutter curve guy where the other pitches aren't that great. And his strikeout rate in the majors is awful. I don't know. I could see like in my 20 teamer if I'm desperate for some arm that might do something. Just picking up Kyle Tyler and using him at home for a little bit and seeing if the stuff numbers are right. You know.
Mm-hmm.
But
the prospects that you're waiting for, by the way, in Miami, beyond Max Meyer, Noble Meyer, who's been bumped up a level somewhat recently. I think he's pitching at high A Beloit right now. He's 19. He's in a lot of top 100 prospect lists. He will probably be an impact pitcher when he gets there, but probably not going to see him until late next season at the earliest.
I mean, they have no reason to start his clock, and he's so young that no one's accusing them of anything, you know?
No. But they also have Thomas White in that same rotation. He's probably their other pitching prospect. It's a little further down most lists. So they got some guys, but it's not like the next wave is right there. It's more like getting these guys back from injuries.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Yankees for a moment. Giancarlo Stanton likely out for 4 weeks. He is down with a hamstring injury, and it's a rough timing because Jason Dominguez just went down for 8 weeks with an oblique injury. This could have been the path for Dominguez to get some experience at the big league level. Instead, Dominguez is out until like mid-August, potentially. So this is turning into a lost season for him. And I think outside of Yankees fans and the people that actually had Stanton on their rosters, his season has been largely underappreciated, hitting 246, slugging 492, 18 homers, 45 RBIs, and 34 runs scored in 69 games. And being in that lineup certainly helps, but the power's still there. And the average hasn't been as much of a drag as we've grown accustomed to in recent years. So this is actually a little more significant both to fantasy managers and to the Yankees than people might think on the surface.
I mean, bat speed is good. He's still got it, you know? And, yeah, I saw something. I saw like a Mike Petriello appearance, and it's like, you know, people have been really fascinated by the idea that like this bat speed list has bad players near the top, or, you know, it doesn't explain everything. And, you know, there's great players, not great bat speed. But I think he said it best on the appearance I saw. Mike Petriello said, in aggregate, swinging harder is better for your offense.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is the other part of Stanton, though, that we've definitely seen, was that you knew that if you were going to draft him, that you'd have a real hard choice at some point about, you know, keeping him or not. And you knew that it would either come due to like a real long slump at the beginning of the season where he's hitting 180, or something like this where he's playing fine, and then you have to decide what to do for 4 weeks. I think I might drop him, just because it's a soft tissue injury in a place where he's gotten a lot of soft tissue injuries. And what if it takes 6 weeks instead of 4? You know?
Yeah. He's a drop in leagues with no IL spots, but he's definitely someone you'll want to try and scoop back up once he gets closer to returning. I mean, like, there's clear, consistent, everyday value in what he's been able to bring to the table. The longer term thing with Stanton that's kind of interesting, the big contract he signed several years ago now with the Marlins runs through 2027. And he's sitting on 420 career homers. Given the bat speed, given the quality of contact, given the amount of time left on his contract, I think he's got a pretty good shot of getting to 500, which is obviously a huge number for milestone purposes and not something we see that often. And yet I just feel like his legacy has been largely shaped and overshadowed by time spent on the IL, which maybe is a little unfair relative to the full scope of his accomplishments as a big league player.
Yeah, he was a really, really impressive player for 8 or 9 seasons, and then I think when he got to New York, it was kind of a combination of having a little bit of that maybe high maintenance body, like just I don't know how to describe it, but it's a great body. I'll take his body, but in terms of like was he too big, or like did he not maintain it right? Was he not flexible enough? Whatever it was, he had soft tissue injuries even when he was a guy that was at the top of his game. And then you add that to age and then a big market. I think it's a really toxic grouping, and it leads people to say like Boomer Esiason was wrong about a lot of details where he said, the Yankees got to stop signing people to these contracts when they're old. And you're like, well, they didn't sign him. And this Stanton signed when he was 25. So it wasn't the original deal that was necessarily the problem. It was acquiring him right when he was about to get old, right as he was getting old. They got the worst parts of it, which, that was a choice, but it's not like they signed Stanton at 39 years old or whatever. So I do think he's going to get all 3 of those seasons. I don't think they'll release him just because IL veterans like this, it's okay. You can kind of sneak them by on the IL. If he needs like a phantom IL to get right at some point, they'll do that. So I think you could give him 20 homers a year for the next 3 seasons.
Yeah, I think he's going to get there. And then I think we're going to have some pretty interesting debates someday, hopefully 5, 6, 7 years down the road when his career is over. We can talk a lot more about, is this actually going to be a Hall of Fame player, or is he going to be one of the near misses from this era? I think people right now would say near miss, no chance. But I think there's a way he could actually put that together. A good combination of factors he brought up, though, that have really shaped perception about the player he is. And off the cuff, without looking this up, who did the Yankees trade to get Giancarlo Stanton? Do you remember any of the players off the top of your head that were in that deal?
Was Cameron Maybin in that trade?
That was the Miguel Cabrera trade.
Who did the Yankees trade for Stanton? I can't think of a single Yankee like prospect in the big leagues for the Marlins.
You're correct about that. They did get one at the time current big leaguer, guy that's no longer playing in the big leagues, back in the deal.
Oh man, I can't remember any of this.
The Marlins had that player for 2 years.
Wow, that's all they got. I remember at one point summing up like what they got for that outfield.
It was bad. Like, I mean, the Yelich trade was a bad trade, of course, too. They didn't do well in those 2 deals.
Yeah. Who was it?
Starlin Castro was the
who I liked a little bit, but it was kind of after we decided he wasn't as good as maybe we thought he was.
Yeah, and the prospects Jose Devers and Jorge Guzman. So they basically just took the contract.
It was a money dump, yeah.
It was clearly a money dump, and the Yankees can afford it. And any year in which the Yankees don't win a World Series, it really hasn't been Giancarlo Stanton's fault, even though Boomer Esiason might think that.
I think that the replacement now is Trent Grisham and JD Davis. They do have probably enough defense. Like, I think you can play Judge in center still, which means that maybe JD Davis plays more than just versus lefties. But it is a handedness, a platoon that could just go up by handedness, where Grisham plays against righties and Davis plays against lefties.
Yeah, I can see that working out that way. But Grisham, they haven't been playing him a lot so far this year. An uptick in playing time for him might not matter that much. I thought it would go better. I thought there was a chance he'd bounce back, and at least for deeper leagues, like mono leagues where you start 5 outfielders, he'd play enough and do enough with those plate appearances to be useful.
I mean, he's
4 homers.
he's like a pull fly ball hitter, or a pull hitter that hits fly balls sometimes. Like you'd figure that maybe he would like that short porch.
I guess that my defense would be like it's hard to get into a rhythm when you've only had 80 plate appearances all season. And
That's
it's
always
the
hard, yeah.
late part of June. So maybe getting more regular run, at least against some righties, would help him get back on track, but they can shuffle things around in that outfield quite a bit. I mentioned up top that the Fangraphs player rater, a new thing they put out there in May, is available, and there's a few different ways to use it. And it was the Stanton valued on the season that I was most curious about. In 12-team 5x5 leagues, Giancarlo Stanton, who had an ADP outside the top 250 overall, has actually been about a $15 player. $14.90 if you want to be specific down to the first decimal. You'd be really happy with what you got so far if you took that flyer on Stanton late. But we started thinking about this from the negative perspective first. The early round disappointments. Which early players are you looking at right now on June 24th and actually saying, you know what, I don't want the discount? Like, how high up into the early rounds are you willing to go before you find a player and say, yeah, I just don't want this guy. I'm not even worried about the fact that I could get a 50% discount compared to draft day. I still don't think the bounce back is going to be good enough to make it work.
I'm sorry to say this, and I'm going to apologize to our listeners, and maybe I should have moved faster on this, but I'm starting to feel this way about Corbin Carroll.
Oh, you're getting to Corbin Carroll now.
I know we've talked about him, and I've said I think it'll be better, and I think he's turning around, and this and that. Here's what really worries me. That's been happening, and it's going to be related to a player that is on pickups this week.
Uh-oh.
He's sitting against lefties.
Yeah, I saw that. It was starting to happen. That's pretty strange.
I do not like that because it just turns him in weekly leagues and even in daily leagues. It turns into somebody that you're not like going to start every day. Like I'd at least want to pick somebody up on a budget that I'm like, at least I can start him every day. Because the other guy that I was going to bring up that we haven't talked about as much is Ozzie Albies. And Albies was the 19th player picked according to their ADP that they're using. And he's been worth $8, $8.50 in a 12-team league, which, is one of the worst numbers around him. I mean, like Lindor, who nobody thinks is having an amazing season, is worth twice that and was picked right ahead of him. And then Bryce Harper, who was picked 3 ahead of him, is worth $34. You know what I mean? So like it's an outlier. You could say he's a buy low. And the reason that I don't think he's necessarily buy low is that just none of the markers that scream to me that he'd be having bad luck are there. Like he's basically doing Ozzie Albies is doing everything he's done always, just a little bit worse. And there's no real reason to say, okay, he will do this more going forward. His max EV is down, but he's had other seasons where it was down worse than this. His barrel is down, but he's had other seasons where his barrel wasn't any better than this. His hard hit is down. He's had other seasons where his hard hit was worse. So just, what he's doing now makes me sort of reevaluate all the other stuff he did in a worse light. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, this Ozzie Albies was always there. Is how I feel when I look at his line. And so with Albies, at least, you could say, I'm trading for somebody that I can get. Maybe he's available. Sometimes trading is about what I can get. Can I get anything? And he might be gettable. And if he is gettable, at least he's going to play every day. As opposed to like Corbin Carroll, where you're like, I might have to sit him against lefties. Now, Albies is better against lefties than righties, but at least the playing every day that's a huge deal. I mean, that's what a lot of people are going after when they're trying to stream bats in 15-team leagues. A lot of times we're just all looking for playing time. So if I'm going to buy one of these two that I don't really like as much anymore for this season, I still think Carroll's a pretty good buy for Dynasty. Albies might be a little bit worse of a buy for Dynasty, but both of these guys are like, I don't really want to acquire them. At least Albies will play every day.
Yeah. I think you took a couple of names in Carroll and Albies that are at least players that a lot of people would have wanted at one point recently.
Mm-hmm.
I think people gave up quickly on Nico Horner this year relative to expectations. Nico Horner's a guy for me that I wasn't in love with the idea of paying full price for his profile during draft season, but there was one league, mixed labor, where I had to do it or felt like I had to do it because it fit the
the
build
batting
correctly.
average plus stolen bases. You needed the stolen bases.
I thought I was going to win average and steals with the foundation I put in place, and he fit perfectly for that. And it's been kind of the double whammy because aside from the average being weirdly low,
he's not stealing as much either.
He's not running as much, and he lost his place atop the order, but kind of quickly. They just didn't. The Cubs haven't been using Nico Hoerner the same way this year, and I don't know what the reasoning is for that exactly. I haven't been able to hone in on that. There was a stretch where he let off like mid-April to mid-May, kind of regularly, and mostly until these last couple days, he was hitting fifth and sixth a lot for the better part of the last 6 weeks.
There is a numbers-based idea for this, which is that high contact player can be more useful in the sort of fifth slot.
Because you've got guys on base more often and you're just trying to make something happen, right?
Right. And it's like, he's not like, if you were a slugger and high contact, then you would be like fourth or whatever, and he's even hit some fourth. And if you were just a bad player, then you would hit like seventh, eighth, and ninth or whatever, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth. So fifth is like this one place where it's like, oh, it's my last good hitter. If he had better OBP, he'd be at the top, or if he was a better hitter overall, he'd be at the top. But his particular skill is good enough to put here and hopefully drive some people in. I do think that some of this is batting average on balls in play, and he should get that batting average rest of season back to like a 275, 280 level. He's pretty much demonstrated that for his career. And so I'm going to give him a 280 average going forward, but I may not give him even the steals that the projection systems are giving him. I think he may only steal like 10 or 12 more, which means that you would come out of the season, once you add the 270 to what he's already done, you'd come out of the season with like a 250 for Nico Hoerner with like 6 homers and, 24 steals. It's not going to feel good.
Not at all what I was hoping for. Very frustrating player that I thought was actually kind of mostly floor. Like, I didn't think there was going to be this big drop. If I did, I wouldn't have been anywhere near him, even in that spot where it made sense from how I was building a team perspective. I was wondering too if maybe he runs more when he is leading off. He still leads the Cubs in games in the leadoff spot. It's just that Mike Tauchman's been there more than I expected, and Tauchman gets on base, right? I mean, like there's a case to just go ahead and use Tauchman more often in that spot right now. 6 for 6 when Hoerner leads off in 34 games as a base stealer. So maybe that lineup spot also dictates how much he runs, because there are guys on base when he's hitting in the middle of the order.
There are tendencies. Yeah, there are tendencies. There are you steal fewer bags the lower you go. There's some sort of bump sometimes in like the 8th spot in front of the pitcher or something. I don't know.
Which is gone now.
Which is which is gone. So I some of that research is a little bit old and has to do with pitcher lineups. But yeah, you kind of steal bases a little bit less as you go down the lineup. I remember this was a conversation with Tommy Edman when Tommy Edman was starting to lose his leadoff spot. That you saw that his steal attempts would probably go down. I think we saw that's what happened with Edman. I do wonder when I'm looking at this, like I'm surprised by how bad Luis Robert Jr.'s and Bo Bichette's numbers are today.
And Robert was out though with that hip injury.
That's true. So you got that like 98 plate appearances. You're like, okay, I understand the rest. So this might be more specific to Bo. So when I do like buy lows or I'm looking at, I usually open a player page. Right now, without opening up the player page, I'm looking at Bo Bichette and wondering, if you've played this much all season and you are this bad, is it possible just that you don't look at the peripherals and you just do a kind of a smell test, like a kind of visceral reaction and say, nope, I don't want that. This is a lost season. Because you might think Randy Arozarena's season has been bad, but he's been worth almost $10 more than Bo Bichette.
Happens when you go into the red. Bo deep into the red right now, -8.
I mean, I do know there's maybe a little bit of touch of gambler's fallacy here, and like oh, he's due. And like maybe you buy him and he gives you the like regular $20 pace going forward. At the end of the year, he's worth $10 and you got the good part. That's totally all possible. But there's something about it being so bad that like I'd rather buy like a Michael Harris who's been worth 10 cents just because his struggles have been not as bad, So there's something kind of that leaps off the page. It's maybe a question about Nolan Jones too. It's like maybe there's, and this might be a good study. It was like if you get to a certain point and you're this far negative and you've played, then you're not really a good buy low candidate just because you've been that bad.
I think there's something to it. Yeah, if it's in the Bo side with the playing time, if it's more like Robert and more like Jones, where half of the season almost has been lost to injury, then I think it's kind of a different group altogether. Yeah, you just have to look at it through a slightly different lens. I think the other player that kind of stands out to me, even though the value is good so far, is Pete Alonso. And there was a question in the Discord actually earlier today about his batted ball stats, like his underlying StatCast numbers, and wondering, what's really going on there. And it's still, for this season, Pete Alonso is in the 87th percentile in barrel percentage, so still very good. But if you do look back at 2023 when he had the wrist injury, or even 2022 when he didn't, there was a lot more red. Like there was more consistency from him across the board. And he was striking out a little bit less than he is now. It's only at 20.5%. It's not that bad, but it's not as good as it was 2 seasons ago. Hard hit rate a couple seasons ago was higher. He's down at the 53rd percentile right now in terms of overall hard hit percentage. That's kind of a surprising turn in the wrong direction for Pete. So what do you think is really going on here?
It is funny. Like if you just took the name off of it and just, looked at the key peripherals that I like, actually, there's a lot to like. The best swing strike rate of his career. You say that the K rate is up, but it's better than when he debuted, when we thought maybe he'd be like a 27% strikeout rate guy.
Yeah.
13% barrel rate, 116 max EV for Pete Alonso. Like he's kind of, he can be a push hitter sometimes where he's hitting the ball out to right center. I believe when he won the hitting derby, he was like hitting home run derby pitches out to right center. Pete Alonso was. So like, he can sometimes get a little right center, but he's not, I don't think that's what's hurting him. Like a 44% pull rate's like fairly ideal. His hard hit rate has been higher in the past, and his ground ball rate is higher now than it's been in the past. So there is something going on. But generally, a lot of the pieces are still there. And I think for me, he's a buy low. Because
you look at the track record, so good power-wise.
Yeah. And the barrel rate's not far from where he was. Like 13.2 right now for him. Barrel rate 13.9 for his career. It's like he's not barreling it. I think if I would tell the story is that, like, he's looking for basically the high fastball, which you can actually tell when he steps to the plate. He does that little half swing, and it's for a high fastball. And he's telling you, put it right here. And pitchers are, trying to throw him sliders in the zone and low fastballs, and he's trying to fight it off a little bit. That's what I see. That's the story I see. And I think given that, he's still been 27% being better than league average, the floor is pretty good. Like if you just gave me what he's been doing for the rest of the season, you would still end up with 241 and like 35 homers. And I think he's going to narrow that gap with a couple weeks in August where he's just white hot, and it's going to be more like 250, 40. And then it would fit right in with the rest of his career.
So do you seek out Alonso before you seek out Matt Olson if you're trading for them? It might take a little more to get Olson, but I think they're similar enough in draft day cost where you're probably talking about similar returns via trade.
Yeah, that's funny. Pete Alonso was taken 7 picks later and has been worth more than Matt Olson. Matt Olson's strikeout rate is too high, and his barrel rate is the worst of his career. His max EV is even down from the last 3 seasons. So there's something going on with Olson. I might actually go after Alonso first, especially if he was slightly cheaper.
Yeah, it is. It's strange to see that just slight downturn in production from Olsen right now. It's picking nits in a profile that's still fine where it is. It's just not what you were hoping for to see him
Like
sitting
he'll
around
still end up
$12.
at 250, 32, 33, 34, 35, somewhere in there, just like Pete Alonso. But I see a little bit more of an inkling of like, if I was going to give one of them like a white hot 2 weeks, it might be Alonso. I
Also,
know
that possibility
Olsen's
of the
home
trade
park is
too.
going to help him. Yeah. Alonso being traded somewhere, that'd be amazing.
We're going to dig more into this tool going forward, but I just saw the post about it finally today, even though it's been there for almost 2 months now. Keep up, DVR. Try to keep up. Couple other news items real quick as we move into where the money went. David Bednar was placed on the IL, and not surprisingly, Aroldis Chapman was the most heavily added player in leagues overnight, Sunday into Monday. The Bednar injury, fortunately, doesn't sound like a terrible situation,
but obliques are obliques.
Obliques can take a little longer than you like. It's a strained left oblique. So maybe 3 to 4 weeks, something in that range is like kind of a good outcome. If he gets back faster, I think I'd be worried about a setback. But all right, so the money went to Chapman in leagues where people need saves. That makes sense. Ben Rice, who we talked about last week in conjunction with the Anthony Rizzo long-term stint on the IL, and Spencer Turnbull was a popular pickup because we learned that Taijuan Walker has a finger injury and he's going to miss some time. So I'm curious of some of the names we saw getting bigger bids. Do you think any of these guys end up pulling in significant value for those who took the plunge over the weekend?
I like Turnbull. I don't like his home park situation amazingly, but I think I would call him sort of like a 60% starter. Like, would you start? I know the Braves are heating back up again. Would you start? I know they're missing Acuna, but would you start Turnbull against the Braves in Philly?
Probably not.
I don't think so.
I probably wouldn't start him on the road against Atlanta either. But yeah, losing a home start is always rough, but Philly's park still does that. And yeah, to your point, Atlanta for the season sitting with a 102 WRC plus. I think if you split that down just to June, you're going to see something a little bit better.
But you also have Turnbull's actual schedule as it stands is at Detroit, at Chicago, at Atlanta, which I don't know. I would start him for that. And then versus Oakland. So basically 3 out of 4. And that's sort of where I have him, 75% starter. So I think that's a pretty good pickup for people that got him. Chapman, I like, but I think there's not like this. He'll pitch so well that when Bednar comes back, Chapman is still the closer. So you're basically just buying a month of a closer. So whatever you think a closer is worth for a season, then you should be spending 1/6 of that or whatever. It also matters, of course, like what your save situation is and blah, 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 blah. We ended up in the main event getting Keegan Thompson for $5. We had put a $16 bet out of 1,000 or something on Chapman, and he went for 37. So we just weren't willing to go all the way to the top there on Chapman. I got Stanek in a similar situation for around $16. Stanek could actually, I think, maybe pitch his way into being closer all year. Man, I don't know what they're doing with Munoz. I don't know. I can't explain it. I think it's that Munoz is maybe a slightly better pitcher that they use in more important situations. And Stanek is a guy that has such bad command that you don't want to bring him into a situation with people on base.
Yeah,
so you kind of make Stanek the clean inning guy.
Yeah, that makes sense for Stanek, given some of the things we've seen from him over his career. I think it's just weird he doesn't strike more guys out. That's the thing that continues to hold me back from being excited about Ryan Stanek. Looking at the usage for Keegan Thompson on Sunday.
Oh, that was so annoying.
He faced 11 batters.
At least he did that. At least he did that early enough that we turfed our like $16 bid on Keegan Thompson.
You saved it. Yeah, because I mean, I thought there was a point going into the weekend. It looked like he might be the latest option. And I think following Javier Assad into that game and pitching as long as he did is maybe a little indication from the Cubs. Like, no, that's not quite our plan right now for Keegan Thompson. But I think he could do it if they gave him the chance.
What is the plan because I don't know who their closer is, or I guess it's Neris, but I wouldn't want it to be Neris. They have the third worst fastball stuff plus in the bullpen in baseball. They don't really have an obvious guy. Stuff plus says that Tyson Miller is interesting, but not great. And I don't know. Maybe Ben Brown will come back off the IL and be a closer.
I actually thought they would use Tyson Miller the way they used Keegan Thompson Sunday night when they claimed him off waivers. I thought he'd be a bridge guy in that bullpen. Anything could be subject to change pretty quickly given the needs the Cubs have. But yeah,
he's done multiple multi-inning things himself. I mean, that just tells you that he's not really kind of like a dominant velo closer type, which they just don't have. They don't really have that many good relievers.
Yeah, maybe 45 pitches for Keegan Thompson on Sunday night.
Yeah,
not a lot of guys do that and then become a closer quickly. So keep that in mind, I guess, as we continue watching what the Cubs are trying to do in their late inning situations. Spencer Schwellenbach actually has a 2-start week this week, so I think that's what kind of pulled people in 12-team leagues in. At St. Louis is the first one. That's actually happening today on Monday. And then
he was
Saturday
available in
Pittsburgh.
TGFBI, the Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational, which is a 15-team league on the NFC platform. And I was like, ooh, I'm pretty excited about him. And I was like doing my little, ooh, how much is too much? And like kind of was the guy going up the mountain that you reference sometimes?
Oh, the yodeler from
the yodeler. Right. I was like, ooh, is that too much? Is it too much? Is it too high? Is it too high? And I did some stupid ass thing. Like I was like, oh, $37. That'll get me Spencer Schwellenbach. And then the news came in 130. I lost 130 to like 37.
I misplayed the situation before Hurston Waldrop got hurt. I was in a league where I dropped a low triple digits bid on Waldrop because I said, I'm going to believe in Waldrop. I'm going to believe in these two pitches. This is going to work. Maybe he'll be just a little bit better than Schwellenbach, and that'll, even though I like both, and that'll be the answer. And it wasn't, because Waldrop got hit twice and hurt on my roster for my troubles. So nice. I'm looking to see if I did get Schwellenbach though much cheaper. I think I got him for 37.
Oh, see, which is what I wanted him
and I bounced back.
Yeah. I wanted him for that.
So maybe I saved it. Coming off this 2-start week, he's going to be home against the Phillies next week. That will be a start in which Spencer Schwellenbach is on my bench. So not throwing him there.
Let's see. In Barf, I got Stanek for 26-6 and Slade Ciccone 2 unopposed. I had Jonathan Cannon, even though it was a really bad start from him. I had him on my list, maybe around Slade for like $1. He went for $6. I do still think Cannon is like a low rent Michael King, which is a worthy, useful player in a lot of 15 teamers.
That's a compliment, right?
I got my Otto Lopez, $16 unopposed. I should have been lower, but
you were just really excited.
No, also, I had an issue. Let me see here. Vaughn Grissom and Ryan McMahon has a really terrible schedule this week. So, and I didn't have a second baseman. So I'm putting in Otto Lopez for 4 games over Ryan McMahon at Houston for 2 games at the beginning of the week. And I guess that probably wasn't worth $16, but it does give me an option to move on from Vaughn Grissom. May just keep Otto Lopez around as the backup MI instead of Vaughn Grissom if we get any more bad news from Vaughn Grissom, or he comes back and he's playing boring. So I'm basically putting Vaughn Grissom on notice with my Otto Lopez acquisition.
You should, only because Vaughn Grissom started doing baseball activities 2 weeks ago, and to my knowledge has not played in a rehab game yet. So they're really bringing him along carefully.
I don't know what the hell is going on.
Did you pick up Emmanuel Valdez anywhere?
He was the one right behind Otto Lopez on the tree.
Yeah. I think with maybe
that would have made sense. They're on the same team,
With Valdez, I mean, it's just like, hey, like this is his chance. We've talked about the prove it. Your window's open. It might be open for a few weeks. do something with it. He's actually doing something with it. Some of the underlying numbers in terms of the quality of contact are actually really good. And if Grissom just keeps taking longer than expected, the window stays open longer than expected.
There was a lot of Ben Rice.
Did you get any Ben Rice, or did you just watch everybody else get Ben Rice?
I watched other people get into Ben Rice. There weren't. I mean, my worst catcher that I could have dropped for him in the leagues where it would have made sense to do something like this was Keibert Ruiz. And I was just staring at Keibert Ruiz, and I was like, this is not a guy I'm dropping for, 6 to 8 weeks of Ben Rice. I have enough belief in Keibert Ruiz to at least get the batting average up going forward.
Yeah, it seemed like it was Ben Rice and Freddie Fermin were the two catchers people were trying to go out and add where they could. I mean, a shakeup in St. Louis because Ivan Herrera got hurt and was already playing a little bit less, but also Wilson Contreras is supposed to come back on Monday. So that was a guy that was rostered a lot of places coming back to take away playing time from someone we were using as a placeholder. But Fermin versus Ben Rice, the great question of our times is which of these in-season free agent pickups will end up being the more valuable second catcher? I mean, I think Rice's opportunity is good because it's the Yankees, but
it's limited by time, whereas Fermin might have runway to make himself the catcher, even with Perez like DHing and stuff.
Yeah, Fermin now has been up basically for 120 games in the big leagues, mostly over the last 2 seasons, 13 homers in 391 plate appearances. He's 6% better than league average. It's nice. He's a good defender too. So he's looking like a guy that can take some of that wear and tear off of Salvador Perez, which is nice for the Royals to have that flexibility, but also offer us something, at least in leagues that require 2 catchers. So I think that was part of the reason why he was a popular pickup. A lot of people out there had to replace injured catchers with, I think Luis Campusano hit the IL with a minor injury. Gabriel Moreno went down. The Herrera situation. So yeah, it seemed like maybe a quarter of teams out there were trying to figure out catcher this weekend.
Using the BATX and the auction calculator, Fermin is 26th. I don't know if they have Rice counting as a catcher on this, so I don't see him anywhere.
The Ben Rice projection from the BATX, 232, 305, 395.
I actually think he shows up a little higher than Freddie Fermin if you use that.
I think we're all trying to get the next David Fry. I think that's what we're all thinking.
Yeah, David Fry killing me. Love it. 700 ADP, 6th best catcher going forward.
David Fry, by the way, since people are wondering with the new player rater, 41st hitter in a 12-team 5-5 league. Number 41, goodness. $17 so far this year. He's been fantastic.
I wish I could have found you that name. I found you some names. I did not find you David Fry.
Any tough cuts for you? It looked like Joe Adele, of all the players that were dropped, it's the usual suspects in terms of injuries, and then Charlie Blackmon with that Rockies homestand being over and having a 5-game week. He was a popular cut as well, but it was guys like Rizzo, Luzardo, Jose Soriano, who's got an abdominal issue, Braxton Garrett, we talked about earlier, Bradish, like those were your main cuts. But Joe Adele was the only heavily dropped player who's playing a ton and just not producing. So we'll talk a lot more about Adele probably on a future episode. But did you have any cuts that sort of jumped off the page to you, even though they weren't injured players?
Not really. James MacArthur, I guess. I saw somebody in Discord was like mad about my James MacArthur pick, and I was like, dude, like, I mean, he got you some saves, and he didn't cost you anything, right? I mean, you didn't take my advice and like go spend a lot on James MacArthur. So I feel like that's a median outcome for like, it's actually a pretty decent outcome maybe for that type of player who wasn't the closer in spring. And like, but I don't know that he's the closer now. I don't know who the closer is now. And he kept being on my bench, and I was like, I think I'm wasting this bench slot. So I ended up being like, I want to have more high velocity. Like, I want this to be a kind of a churn and burn spot. I need to get something out of this spot now. I can't wait anymore for James MacArthur. That's what I decided. I guess that was the toughest cut.
Yeah, add the Royals to the list of teams that really need some more bullpen help.
Everybody needs Tanner Scott.
Everybody needs Tanner Scott.
Is there anybody else that could go? We'll talk about this a little bit more. I also picked up Reed Detmers in the main event, which I think we'll talk about Reed Detmers more tomorrow. But you know, as the trade deadline approaches, we should identify. I have a piece this a week about like who might be traded, and I think that the next idea would be a fantasy piece, being like who might get an opportunity behind the guys who get traded. But you know, my eyes keep kind of circling around Michael Kopech. I mean, the reason why is not that he's been like a dominant closer or anything, but that I know that teams value stuff models across the league. And we've also seen a lot of teams for closers in particular, and it might be that clean inning thing we're talking about, being willing to take on pitchers that don't have great command if they have great stuff, especially in the bullpen in particular. And when you get Michael Kopech, you could tell yourself, you know, we get him for a few years. And we get him for this year and all of next year. And he's not going to be that expensive. And he could be at least our setup guy, if not our closer. I think he would make a lot of bullpens better. And he has to be attainable. And I don't know who would close after him. Maybe Leisure, maybe somebody else, maybe Brebbia. But when you talk about available relievers, Michael Kopech jumps to the top of my head.
Yeah, I think we're always starting from the teams that have clearly, you know, punted this season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And working from there. Those glob teams that sink, then we're going to find a few more names that stand out. With the A's, all the stuff that you see about the A's bullpen is, would they trade Mason Miller if they're blown away? Well, sure. Like any team will trade anybody if you overpay enough. But Lucas Erceg seems like someone they'd be more likely to trade, and you'd have that same benefit of, you know, multiple years of control. You'd have him for a long time. As long as he's good, you'd have him. And maybe you can still talk yourself into the possibility that as someone who was a position player for a long time, has only really been pitching full time for 4 seasons now, that Erceg could still get a lot better and be an elite reliever for several years.
I'd like to say that nobody's giving away Gleyber Torres for a reliever. But we had Cole Reagans for Aroldis Chapman 2 years ago. So I do think, you know, selling a top of the line reliever, even if they don't necessarily have a lot of years control, can still get you something. So, you know, if anybody in Chicago is listening, you should probably trade Michael Kopech and maybe even Garrett Crochet.
Well, the Crochet thing is an even bigger question.
It's really, I think that's a fascinating, super complicated question.
Yeah. Kopech, I think you can pretty easily talk yourself into finding a suitable trade partner and moving on accordingly. But so many good teams, or what look like good teams, need those boosts in the bullpen. I do think what you get in the return could be pretty interesting, because I don't think there will be enough quality relievers to meet the demand of all the contending teams based on how things are shaping up with a little over a month to go before we get to the trade deadline.
I think the biggest names in the biggest teams in baseball, the most important teams in terms of record over the next few days and what will happen at the trade deadline, are probably the Blue Jays and the Mets. The Mets have been playing a little bit better recently. If they stay in the trade deadline, then there's a lot of players that come off the market. The Blue Jays have been not playing so well. They're 7 games under in a very crowded division. They're getting inching closer and closer to being selling. Of course, the bullpen's not a great place to look for them because it's been so injured. But you'd have to think that Chad Green, Jimmy Garcia, and maybe even Romano, if they're healthy, could be available.
Yeah.
Even if we don't know what they're going to do about Bo Bichette and Vlad Guerrero. That's like the Blue Jays are super fascinated that way. The Mets, if they fell back, could offer a lot of players. So those are the two names, the two teams that I'm kind of circling as like what happens in the next month or so is, you know, the next 3 weeks may determine a lot about what happens at the trade deadline.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. A handful of other teams kind of floating in that exact same place right now. They could be on the obvious sellers list once we get to that late part of July. We are going to go on our way out the door. A reminder, you can get a subscription to The Athletic. Should be $1 a month right now at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. Our annual best deal we offer is up right now. You can find Eno on Twitter at Eno Saris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. Find the pod at Rates and Barrels. Join our Discord using the link in the show description. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.